All right, so after dancing, the next curricular element formally Locke introduces into the curriculum is reading. And he says, quote, "When he can talk, it is time he should begin to learn to read." This is rather striking developmentally. One of the things that Locke is sensitive to is developmental issues in education. But it's striking here in this case because he is saying that one should begin to teach reading as soon as one can talk. Now, I'm not sure how proficient the talking has to be, but children usually start to learn to talk when they're a year or so, and they are often pretty good by the time they are 2 and so forth. So perhaps Locke is suggesting that if the child has the idea of language and some physical facility at doing so verbally, that it's at that point that one should integrate, again, the reading with the talking and also learn a kind of eye coordination as well as verbal coordination and dexterity and so forth. All right, after we have talking, right, as formal education, reading as formal education, and the integration of those things too, Locke then turns to memory, that we should build into the curriculum fairly early on. Memory training. Obviously, we want to train the student's body. We want to train the student's physical ability to dance. We want to train the student's eyes so that he or she can read. The movement of the mouth and the tongue and the palate and so forth, and learning how to speak here. But we also have various other important cognitive faculties, including memory. And so Locke goes on to mention here that in conjunction with the learning to read, we should have the students practice learning certain things by memory or learning them by heart, and so being able to recite, for example, the Lord's Prayer, various creeds, and so forth. Locke then introduces writing. This is a little bit later in the development. He says we should have the students able to read proficiently before we have them begin writing. And so it's no doubt going to take a couple of years before the student is able to read proficiently. And so we may now be talking about a student who is 5 years old or 6 years old or say. So next striking formal curricular element is, and I will read to you, quote, "As soon as he can speak English, it is time for him to learn some other language. This nobody doubts of when French is proposed." Okay. Now, Locke says nobody doubts this, and there's a good reason, obviously, for including French on the curriculum here, but this is also a bit of a dig at the idealist, because if we're an idealist, our emphasis is more likely to be on the great classic traditions. We're much more focused on looking backward to the great traditions in human thought and human intellectual pursuit. And so for an idealist, the first of the other languages that one will learn aside from one's vernacular is more likely to be Latin. Latin being the great language of scholarship, and Latin being the language in which many of the great classic texts have been written or translated. The idealists are less likely to be interested in first teaching students a modern language, a living language, a language of politics and business of the contemporary world, but that's exactly Locke's point here as a realist. If we're interested in including things in the curriculum, we want things that are of practical value, of real world value, and French in this case certainly fits the bill. The French at this point, along with the Spanish, are two of the world's great powers. They're great powers politically. They're major political or economic trading partners with the British, right, and so forth. And so if we are talking about education for people in the modern, early capitalist, early democratic kind of society, chances are very good that we're going to want them to vote intelligently on political matters, and that means knowing something about what the French are up to, or they're going to go into business, they're going to be trading with the French, and so French is going to certainly be a very practical language for a realist to have them learn. After French is mastered, Locke then goes on to say Latin certainly is very appropriate. There's lots to be learned from the classics, many of the great works that continue to have relevance rather on into modern times for a realist are available in Latin, perhaps not yet translated into either French or English, and so Latin is an important language here. Locke goes on to include the following subjects, quote, arithmetic, geography, chronology, history, and geometry too. And the point of all of these things is that they are immensely practical. Arithmetic is practical. If one is going to keep one's books, if one is going to go into business, if one is going to go into business, particularly in an international context, knowing geography is very well. Chronology, having some sense of the world, the timeline of the world and how things relate to each other across time is very important. And timekeeping in the business world is important. And all of that helps one learn history. History is very important. There are lots of lessons. History being a laboratory of various kinds of experiments in human living, socially, politically, economically, scientifically, and so forth. It's important for people who are going to be able to function well in the natural world to know history lessons as they bear here. Geometry, also a subject of very good practical importance in many respects, and so forth.